My guests today are Isodoros Passadis and Alon Muroch. Isodoros and Alon are both here to talk about the wonderful world of staking. Isodoros is contributing to the Lido DAO as the master of validators, while Alon is the founder of SSV Labs. Welcome to the show, gentlemen.
Thank you very much for having us.
It's a pleasure. Let's do what we do at the beginning of the show. I'll get you both to just introduce yourself. Let's start with you, Izzy. If you want to go first, just give us a little bit of your personal and professional backstory. Love to hear what you've been doing in the lead up, to getting involved at Lido, working on the DAO as master of validators.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So my background, at least in terms of education, is actually kind of far from crypto. I studied international relations with like a second major in economics. So that's the tie-in, I guess. But after college, I ended up in the world of auditing, actually. So I was a financial auditor for a very, very long time. And then was involved in risk frameworks and risk assessment and internal controls. After leaving Big Four, I went into the retail industry for approximately 6 years. And then COVID hit, and I was figuring out what I was going to do with my life. And I started getting more involved in the crypto space, writing a little bit about game theoretic aspects of crypto and specifically staking and, the potential centralizing effects of some market dynamics on the staking ecosystem and what staking protocols could do to fend off these centralizing effects. And crypto being the industry that it is, somebody found one of these, in crypto we call them papers, but really they're glorified blog posts, and said, hey, this is pretty cool. Do you want to write a second one and focus on what Lido DAO as a protocol in this space can specifically do? And writing an article turned basically into me becoming a full-time contributor to Lido and blending my experience, I guess, and knowledge in terms of using risk frameworks to create sustainable processes and incentive mechanisms to bring together different actors collaborating on a protocol on top of Ethereum to try to create a robust protocol. And so in my role as master of validators, I work together with a lot of other contributors in the DAO. And there's a team that I lead that we call node operator mechanisms. And really, we act as liaisons in between one set of the users of the protocol, so what we call node operators, the people that run the validators that underpin the Lido protocol, and the protocol itself. And so we just try to find ways to make their usage of the protocol as effective and as efficient as possible and provide good service, basically, to the other users of the protocol.
Got it. Thank you, Izzy. We'll go to you, Alon. Alon, of course, I mentioned, is the founder of SSV Labs. SSV Network, of course, is a leading DVT provider. So we'll learn more about how this all fits together today. But yeah, Alon, same as you. Bit of background, please.
I've been in the space actually since 2013, so just around 11 years now. I'm a developer. This is how I got my start. Did a bunch of different things, contributed code to Bitcoin early days, and then actually worked on the Java version of Ethereum back in the day, and did a bunch of different things. The last 4 years, SSV Lab has been focused heavily on staking, and more specifically DVT. We've been working on DVT for about 2.5 years now. Fully released to mainnet in December of last year. And we've seen significant growth ever since then, working with giants like Lido and others on basically shifting or transitioning the Ethereum ecosystem from using a single point of failure infrastructure for running validators to distributed infrastructure based on DVT, with a lot of different initiatives like SimpleDVT with Lido and others. And yeah, that's pretty much where we've been 100% focused the past 2.5 years.
Yes, thank you, Alon. So yeah, so DVT, of course, distributed, validated technology. I guess, Alon, maybe we start with you, so we can see that Lido protocol is going to be integrating DVT to help increase and decentralize node operations. Do you want to just give us a little bit more of an overview of what a DVT module is, and
Sure.
how SSV plays into this?
Sure. So maybe kind of zoom out first to kind of give a brief on how staking works in general, or at least how the infrastructure is set up for staking. So you have this software called the Beacon chain, the Beacon node. The Beacon node is really a piece of software that runs and executes or syncs with the Beacon chain, which is the consensus layer for Ethereum, and with all of the different parameters and all of the different things the protocol does. But the Beacon node in of itself is not doing staking at all. It's just syncing and the current state of the Beacon chain. There's another piece of software called a Validator client, which is much smaller, much lighter, but it's basically the one that actually executes what we call duties for the validator within the greater Beacon chain. A validator is a simple key that is holding 32 ETH deposited by the user, and once you deposit that to a specific validator, that validator has those duties, and you have to execute those duties to actually earn rewards. And each validator secures, the more validators we have, the more secure Ethereum is, and that's really how you run it. Now, it's actually very difficult and expensive and time consuming to actually run a Beacon node and a validator client and upgrade and monitor and all of those types of things. And so a lot of different services were created, Lido and the likes, to actually alleviate a lot of that complexity out of the user. So, if you can imagine, the entire Ethereum staking world, you have on the one hand, the people with capital that they want to stake. On the other hand, you have people which are technical that know how to run infrastructure. There's a very small subset of those two groups, which are both capital owners and know how to run infrastructure. And so what happened was the infrastructure providers, the tech people, created those services to alleviate all of those complexities. Now, the problem was that with that came a lot of challenges in terms of how do you run infrastructure well, how secure is your infrastructure, how decentralized your infrastructure, how many types of clients you're using so you don't have a single point of failure, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Which data centers you're using, if everyone is using AWS North America, that's a big problem for Ethereum, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a lot of degrees of that complexity going on. And so with time, we found that a lot of those complexities, some of them got solved, but some of them didn't. And so with DVT, what we're trying to hope to do is alleviate a lot of those complexities for the infrastructure. So, we see that services are paramount for the growth of Ethereum and the growth of staking. And also other kind of extensions of staking with restaking and so on. But what we want to do is to make sure that the infrastructure level is matched to the actual amount of capital invested into staking. Currently, there's over 1 million validators on Ethereum, which is more than 32 million ETH at stake. And so we want to make sure that we have as few of those, what we call single points of failure, managing those 32 million ETH. The dream is, if you look at the absolute dream, or the kind of the initial thought was that every validator would be run by a single person, right? A unique person. Obviously, that's not really possible in the real world. But having said that, if we strongly believe that if we can adopt DVT on a large scale on Ethereum, that we can, even with the centralization issues and challenges we have in this industry, even though that there's probably less than 10 entities that control most of the stake today, et cetera, we still can greatly improve on security, censorship resistance, decentralization, et cetera. And so this is really our charter. This is really our vision. We want to bring this type of new infrastructure to better facilitate the growth and going forward with staking in Ethereum.
Yes, thank you, Alon. Just very well articulated there. Look, Izzy, let's go to you. Just anything further to add there to provide further context, maybe from, the Lido DAO perspective?
Yeah, absolutely. So, in general, historically, contributors have thought of DVT across three different axes. So, one, and perhaps the most important one, is like the operational robustness, which is what Alon mentioned. So, how do we spread the technical and operational like responsibility of running a validator across multiple parties, who can then also be further differentiated between themselves? So, if all of these parties are obviously running like within the same data center, that's not ideal. But a DVT allows you to spread, for example, like even me, if I was to run a validator, I could run the validator using 5 different servers like across the geography at the same time, to spread the operational risk, but we can also spread it across multiple parties. And when you combine that with what we call DKG, so decentralized key generation, which is the process of creating a validator private key, but also using a cryptographic ceremony through which the key is generated in parts or shards, where each participant has a shard that no other participant has, and then you need a consensus of all of these shards for the key to work together. You also have additional safety and safeguards from the perspective of key material. And so it's like safeguarding the cryptographic proof of what constitutes a validator. And the third axis is something that is like a little bit tangential and ties into another aspect that Alon mentioned, which is that ideally, eventually, we want as many people to run validators as possible, or at least contribute to the running of a validator. And so that means building permissionless systems where anybody could run a node or participate in running a node if they wanted to. One of the chief risks of something like this, especially in a protocol like Lido, where a lot of the stake is so to speak, delegated, is that because that capital doesn't actually belong to the node operator, there's not necessarily something at risk for them if something goes wrong. So what a lot of permissionless systems do is that they require some sort of collateral from the perspective of a node operator in order to run nodes and receive stake from others. And then therefore this kind of offsets the economic risks that might be associated with that. What happens with DVT is that the size of the collateral can be drastically reduced, because the likelihood of the impact of one person doing something wrong on a DVT-based cluster is a lot lower than if one person is running the node by themselves. So if I'm co-running a node together with Alon, both he, myself, and let's say a third person, or at least 2 of us, would need to be offline in order for the node to be offline. Whereas if I was running the node by myself, just me being offline is enough for all of that stake to not be active. So across these 3 axes, operational robustness, technical robustness, and safety of key material, but also reducing barriers to entry for new entrants, I think like these are like the 3 superpowers of DVT. And as a contributor to Lido, what we want to do is use DVT as a technology to augment all of these capabilities of the protocol. So recently, a module attached to the core Lido protocol called SimpleDVT went live. This was just approximately a month and a half ago, which is currently only running 60 validators, but is slated to run eventually somewhere between 0.5% up to 4%. There's currently a proposal within the Lido DAO, or a discussion at least for a proposal to raise the limit of the SimpleDVT module to 4% of all of the stake that's running within Lido. And already, just for these 60 validators, the number of node operators that is involved is 79 compared to the 37 curated operators that run the majority of Lido stake. So this will allow us to onboard hundreds of node operators, and hopefully by the end of the year, once there is a permissionless module, on an unbounded number of new operators running validators, either in DVT configurations or not. But the importance is that this option is there. It helps the robustness, and it also helps people who otherwise might not be able to take the leap to running a validator because they don't have enough collateral to put forward, or are apprehensive about their technical acumen to be able to run validators in groups together with others, whether they be professionals or their friends, and to basically decentralize the stake of both Lido and Ethereum.
Yeah, got it. Thank you, Izzy. And you mentioned I think it's, the SSV SimpleDVT test net, and I can see on the SSV website. I'll put a link in the show notes, but there's a nice blog post which links to a paper. Alon, maybe you can jump in here and just kind of talk us through, I guess, this was just published last week, wasn't it? So though the the testnet results there, how did that go?
So first of all, it's important to say that there was several testnets actually
Sure.
with Lido, several iterations. Everyone was incremental and kind of actually followed us into mainnet as well. So we actually started those testnets before we were even on mainnet, and so in that regard, a lot of kudos to Lido for being early adopters. It's not entirely obvious that such big protocols will actually want to adopt such new technologies. And so we had several iterations of that testnet, testing out different things. Obviously, the final testnet, which concluded not too long ago, was basically mimicking how it will be eventually deployed into mainnet. So all of the different characteristics. So from clustering operators into those groups, and then forming clusters, creating keys via DKG, making the deposits, making sure that they are actually running with good performance. We are well over the benchmark of the Holesky testnet and kind of had a great results there. And then finally also exiting and kind of sunsetting the testnet. So the entire process was basically one-to-one as if it was mainnet. It was very important to see that it works well. All of the kinks and issues and challenges throughout it we could solve. And so basically now we're at the point where we then want to deploy to mainnet, to the SimpleDVT mainnet module. And it will basically be identical. So it's going to be, forming those clusters with operators that prove themselves in testnet as well. And then creating those keys, depositing them, seeing that it works well, good performance, and then scaling it up, as Izzy mentioned, potentially up to 4% for the entire module. So I think that's kind of, from our end, was really, really great to see that it works. We managed to onboard into testnet a lot of different types, not just the sheer number of operators, but also the type of operators that were in the testnet. So there were operators that we've known for a long time that knew how to set up SSV nodes, no problem. You had people that it was their first time, but very technical. You have a type of different, a variety of different people and entities going in and testing it out. So it was really great, again, for a young protocol to come and go through that and prove itself. It's capable of holding that. Holding it for its own and actually being able to deploy to mainnet. And so from our end, it was a long journey, but a very well one taken. So we're super happy to do those integrations, SimpleDVT later on. As you mentioned, there's other modules kind of planned within the Lido ecosystem. And so I think this is, and again, the commitment Lido has to this type of decentralization and so on. They are leaders in that. I don't see any other protocol putting so much efforts into it. Of course, they're the biggest one, so it's great to have to make sure that they know and put that as an objective. But it's definitely not something I see in other protocols, at least not to that degree. And so I think SimpleDVT is a really important milestone for DVT because if it works with Lido, it definitely works with smaller protocols. So yeah, that's kind of from our end.
Yeah, very well said, Alon. So Izzy, if we go back to you and just maybe, we've talked about this a little bit, but just give us from your perspective a little bit more, I suppose, context on the implications of, the DVT, making that go live, and also just where we are, I suppose, in that kind of staking journey at the moment. You can see Alon's just pointed out, of course, Lido is the biggest staking platform protocol, 437,364 stakers, it says on the front page at the moment. What's next, I suppose?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we started this year off with, like Alon said, the the third iteration of DVT testnets that we've done. We actually started, I think the first one was almost 2 years ago, back when SSV was still at like quite a nascent stage. And then in February launched the SimpleDVT module, which is now gradually ramping up. And there's also a proposal on, or a discussion for a proposal on the Lido forums about increasing the breadth, basically total amount of stake that the SimpleDVT module could hold. And at the same time, given that Lido kind of reconfigured its core architecture May of last year into a modular architecture, it's possible for DVT infrastructure providers like SSV to build their own modules that would basically attach to the core Lido protocol like SimpleDVT has, and allow for more robust or somewhat differentiated mechanisms around how clusters are formed, how rewards are metered out. So perhaps instead of like in SimpleDVT where everybody gets the same amount of rewards, you might want to give rewards based on performance, not only performance of the cluster, but even maybe participants within the cluster to disincentivize freeloading or something like that. And so we look forward to new modules in the future. And we also look forward to, hopefully by the end of the year, what contributors are calling the community staking module, which is basically the first permissionless module that would allow node operators to utilize the Lido protocol in any way they see fit, but very easily they could basically just use a DVT infrastructure such as SSV on top of the permissionless staking module. So SSV could also, for example, create like a kind of like integration that uses the module underneath and allows, for example, operators to find each other or create their own groups and then very rapidly spin up new validators on this module. And really what it means is that there will be multiple different avenues and venues for operators to be able to utilize DVT to run validators for Lido. Currently, the largest share of validators on the protocol is run by what we call the curated operator module, which is basically a permission set of node operators by the DAO. They do not currently utilize DVT for the running of these validators, mostly because the DVT infrastructure technologies were still kind of like nascent up until a couple of months ago when they entered mainnet. And so we're looking for this year to kind of like battle test this technology. And once that happens, I also foresee that it's likely that within the next 1.5 to 2.5 years, you will see that a lot of node operators, even within the curated set, might start using DVT to run their validators. It might be either using DVT to run it across their own infrastructure, but in a more distributed way, or it might be collaborating in a more formal capacity with other node operators. Not exactly like a joint venture, but at least having like a digital cooperation of sorts on chain to run more validators at scale, because this gives you a lot more robustness, not only in terms of infrastructure setup. So one node operator might be really good at running, cloud-based infrastructure out of certain regions, and another node operator might be great at running on-premises infrastructure or using bare metal in local data centers. And DVT kind of allows them to marry these competitive advantages without necessarily each of them having to delve into areas where they're not experts.
Yeah, cool. Thank you, Izzy. Look, gentlemen, as we start to wrap up this part of the podcast, it'd be good just to touch on some different parts of the staking ecosystem and I suppose Ethereum. I'm thinking, obviously, the Ethereum ETF in the US looks like it's going to go ahead. Maybe we just quickly start there in terms of, I haven't looked into it too deeply, but I think, what happens to the Ethereum that goes into that ETF from a staking perspective? Just love to get both of your quick thoughts on that. Alon, should we jump to you first?
No. I think people underestimate the long-term effect of the ETFs and overestimate the short-term impact. So on the short term, we'll probably see a lot of capital going in to Ethereum, potentially Ethereum staking, though I think it's going to be a harder to swallow type of deal, maybe a bit later. The long-term effects are super interesting. Imagine, we about a year ago, we still had those debates: securities, not securities, Ethereum, not Ethereum, centralized. All of that's going to be blown out the window, because imagine that most of the households in the US and around the world will effectively be holding Ethereum. Now, that's a major step in basically saying that crypto is mainstream, and I think that's the biggest long-term effect we can hope for. And so it's not so much about the short term, though it's obviously it's going to be probably pretty static. The long term is pretty interesting, even more so. And I think in terms of ultimately what impact it's going to have on staking, ultimately stakers are the ones that benefiting from more usage from Ethereum, right? From transaction fees all the way to restaking and MEV and all of those kind of augmented staking type of reward issuance. And so, the more usage you have, especially the more usage you have around those types of economies and DeFi and all of those types of things, which will for sure come alongside those ETFs in the next few years. Ultimately, stakers will base their economical decision of staking based on that, and so I think that's the big, probably the biggest impact. The economies of staking will be morphed. We'll probably get to a point where the native issuance of Ether to stakers in the form of block proposals and attestations, etc., will not be the majority of the rewards those stakers will receive. Nonetheless, their activity will be paramount to the Ethereum ecosystem, even in a more significant way. And so the long-term effects here are incredible. And I think that we are underestimating the changes to the unit economics of staking for the long term. I think both ETFs, restaking, MEV, all of those avenues that augment what staking is, I think will drastically change, and potentially other avenues as well, will drastically change the unit economics of staking. And with that, the entire infrastructure for staking. So from DVT to staking pools to et cetera, the impact will be immeasurable. So that's kind of my opinion. Yeah.
Yeah. Is there anything further to add there on ETFs, future of staking?
Yeah, no, I think Alon nailed it there. So there's a lot of things changing, and it's very difficult to say from now what those will look like. As he said, of course, like initially some of the ETFs were saying that they were intending on staking the underlying ETH. They've since revised these prospectuses, I'm guessing at the suggestion of the SEC to remove that clause. I don't think that that's necessarily bearish for staking in general, or that we might not see staked ETFs at some point in the future. I think it's reasonable that it's probably not the thing we'll see right out of the gate. For stakers in general, that is probably kind of a good thing, because some people were worried that all of that ETH underlying the ETFs being staked might drastically change the unit economics or the marginal returns on staking immediately, or at least definitely crowd the beacon chain. So at least that concern is kind of put off. But as Alon said, there's a lot of like exogenous changes to staking unit economics that we need to be wary of and find a way to not necessarily account for, but at least research and analyze, especially in the context of this debate going on right now within the Ethereum community around something like minimum viable issuance, which is, how much should the network pay essentially via issuance, the rewards that go to people who are validating the network for the safety of the network, and how is that affected by, for example, if there's ETH ETFs, like all of that ETH being staked, and who would be the stakers behind those ETFs, and what happens when, for example, all that ETH being staked drastically changes the issuance, so that solos, for example, may not necessarily be economically viable anymore, and you only have people that do it only out of ideological reason, which is a very good reason to do it, but it's not necessarily the most sustainable thing. And so I think in general, what is important here is that people start thinking about these issues, start researching these issues, and start trying to map out, at least using some sort of like economic modeling, what the potential futures hold, so that the network starts taking a more proactive stance in terms of figuring out where these market dynamics are leading us, rather than reactive stances. So, for example, like I think an urge to go to drastic issuance reduction immediately is probably a bit more reactive than it is proactive. But to be honest, like the amount of research that has occurred in the space is not yet full enough or holistic enough to say whether that's a good idea or not. And I definitely look forward to more of that research being done.
Sure, thank you. Another one of the staking narratives, if you like, and we've talked a little bit about it today, but restaking. So, yeah, how do we see that playing out over the next year, 2 years, 5 years, both from, I guess, yeah, Lido perspective, SSV perspective? How are we thinking about that? Alon, quick thoughts from you, restaking.
I'm more and more I'm adopting the viewpoint of restaking being the long tail of staking. And by what I mean by that is staking will always be bigger than restaking by the definition that restaking is reusing staking, right? So staking will always be bigger. It's going to be more mainstream. It's going to be more ubiquitous everywhere in the Ethereum ecosystem. And so the more and more I think about it, I think that restaking is going to be the long tail of staking in the sense that it will generate more use cases, but with diminishing amount of people using them. So, if you can imagine, on the long tail of restaking, you'll have very, very, very risky type of restaking activities, which very few people will do for very big amount of risk and potentially reward. But ultimately, you'll have this market, which is, the more you go, into the far, the more risky it is. But you also have restaking, which is, very, very close to staking itself in terms of risk, in terms of rewards, et cetera, et cetera. And so I think that's how I look at it. And so I think it brings potential to everyone. It brings potential because simply it makes the market more sophisticated. It means that you can choose exactly where you want to be with your staking activity. And the interesting part of it is it's based on the same infrastructure. It's based on the same type of users and et cetera. So for me, it brings a lot of interesting opportunities, especially for SSV, I think. And I think it brings opportunity for everyone. I mean, we saw the market shaking with new excitement the past few months. And I think, again, it's super, super early on. I don't think it indicates anything yet. But in general, I think it brings a lot of innovation into the space, a lot of different use cases. I think it will be kind of the big bang for staking, or the second big bang. Maybe the first one was in December 2020 with Genesis. But it's the same when we discovered interoperability and composability within DeFi. So DeFi was before that, but it wasn't as big after we actually discovered that different DeFi protocols can be composed to one another, et cetera. So I think that this is what we'll see with staking. And so for me, I think it's very, very exciting. It's really depends on where it's going to go. It's super early days. I don't think we can make judgment calls on where it's going to be. But I see it as the long tail of staking, basically.
Long tail of staking. Yes, indeed. Thoughts from you, Izzy, restaking?
I think oddly enough, it's really, really early to tell. The bull market probably coincided with at like a seeming urgency, I think, for restaking to flourish before it could really figure out what it's going to be and how it's going to do that. I think there's a lot of questions around to what extent the revenue and economics around restaking are sustainable, especially when you consider the amount of ETH that wants to be restaked. If you think about it from the market perspective, and how much ETH is currently awaiting to be restaked in Eigenlayer, which is currently the largest restaking protocol, and there's a few new ones also coming out, like Karak, Nectar, and Symbiotic. I think restaking in general is a really, really interesting idea, and it's a very logical idea, much in the same way that liquid staking is, in the sense that capital always wants to find more effective and more efficient ways to be used. And so it's a logical progression of, let's say, the capital economics of a system like Ethereum. The difficulty with restaking, unlike liquid staking, is I think that the risks are a lot more opaque, not only to restakers and stakers themselves, but also to the protocol. To what extent can the base layer be aware of how the collateral that is being used to secure the base layer is being used and reused, and then theoretically reused up the chain. And to their credit, like a lot of the restaking protocols recognize that this is one of the biggest problems and are thinking up of ways to fix it. But the difficulty here is not only from like a technical perspective, but also from a unit economics perspective. How can you create enough revenue on these satellite networks, if we want to call them that utilize the economic security of Ethereum, such that the staked capital of Ether that underlies them is worthwhile from an effort perspective to be staked there and not utilized somewhere else, like in DeFi, for example. And so I think it makes a lot of sense if you're spinning up on one of these networks, because what you want to do is show cultural alignment, so to speak, with the Ethereum ecosystem. And one of the best ways to do that is to reutilize its economic security. But on the other hand, you have to find a way to pay for it. And right now it's easy to pay for it through points, which are kind of like imaginary and speculative. But it's going to be a lot more difficult when you need to rely on actual revenues and actual usage of the network in order for that to materialize. So I think it'll be probably a year or two for all of these things to kind of settle, and for networks to figure out what is economically viable and sustainable or not. And then we will also start to see like real maturation and perhaps consolidation of not only restaking protocols, but also players in the restaking market, as node operators, for example, might start figuring out that it's not such a great idea for them to essentially be money managers and figuring out like which AVSs they're going to run and which AVSs they're not going to run, because it's a really, really difficult thing. And then I think you also kind of end up with entities that are spreading their specialization in a way that isn't necessarily what they're accustomed to, and trying to take experience and domain expertise in one thing, which is like validation, and then trying to apply it to something else, which is risk assessment and valuation, which is quite different.
Yep, got it. Thank you. Very well said. I think, gentlemen, it is almost time to wrap this episode up. But before we do that, I like to finish each podcast with a very quick round of rapid fire crypto conversation hot takes. Are you guys up for it?
Yep, let's go.
I'm just going to, I'll run some questions at you in turn, gentlemen. Now, you're both very good talkers, so let's just try and keep it, I don't know, rapid fire, kind of hot take style. No right or wrong way to do it. But let's start with you, Alon. It's a bit of a funny one for you. I think we know what you say, but let's see what you do say. Where would you say that you sit on the Bitcoin maximalist to multi-chain opportunist spectrum, and why?
I'm very sad about the state of Bitcoin, and I think it's downhill currently. So I don't see a lot of that future, to be honest, and it saddens me.
Yep, fair enough. Izzy, what would you say is your firmest conviction crypto opinion?
Ooh, firmest. I think some sort of smart contract layer is almost definitely going to be the financialization layer of the future. I think, however, to a certain extent, unfortunately, for ideological reasons, but it's going to be a lot more curtailed from, let's say, a censorship resistance perspective than most of us would want it to be. But a lot of times with mass adoption, you have to accept some practical realities.
Very well said. I like that. Okay. Alon, Bill Gates famously said that we tend to overestimate what we can accomplish in 2 years and underestimate what we can accomplish in 10. Of course, 10 years in blockchain is a very long time, but yeah, look, let's just go with Ethereum. 10 years time, what does it look like?
In 10 years time, probably will hit at least 25% of our expected TPS limits. So, if the TPS limits is 1,000, we'll probably hit 250 transactions per second throughout the entire Ethereum ecosystem. Having said that, I think Ethereum globally in 10 years will probably amount to 5 to 10% of the entire world GDP. So
I like it. All right. Hey, William Gibson, sci-fi author, famously said that the future is already here. It's just not evenly distributed. Izzy, can you think of an example of the future being here right now, but most people aren't aware of it?
So this is actually tangential to crypto, but there's a burgeoning Venn diagram of crypto and AI. But if you think about where the locus of power in AI currently lies, so basically like open AI, how decisions are being made there, and the effect that those decisions have on people like every day. Like we don't realize, for example, how all of the data that we've been pushing onto the internet for the last 10, 15 years has been utilized to essentially create money for other people, while the people that have trained these models have gotten nothing. I think this is a very, very good example of that. People have been commoditized, their data, their experiences, their livelihoods, and it's been commoditized for others and is currently being controlled by others. And unless we find ways to take that back, the future will become more and more unequal.
Yeah, very well said. Yeah, we're all just products of the machine, really. Because it's such a good question. Same question to you, Alon. What's an example of the future being here right now, but most people aren't aware of it?
I think the foundation for completely changing all businesses and markets that have to do with trust is already here. Ethereum is a trust minimizing mechanism. And so if you can imagine all of the different industries which are trust-based, which is a lot of it, for example, is banking and insurance and all of those types of things, that will be completely transformed into smart contracts in the future. And so that's on the one hand. I will go with easy around to AI as well. I think that AI will do the same to different industries which require repetitive actions or stored knowledge. And so I think a lot of factories will become AI powered. I think a lot of different industries and jobs which are basically storing information into people's head will be transformed by AI as well. To some degree, even medicine in that sense. And so I think those two types of industries are tackling very, very old markets, but will completely change them. Yeah.
Yep. And well, speaking of AI, I guess it brings us nicely to our final question. We'll go to you first, Izzy. The final question is, what is your favorite science fiction book, film, or TV show?
Dune, the book by Frank Herbert.
Okay. Second film though was outstanding, wasn't it?
I haven't seen it yet.
No spoiler alerts. I'm still waiting for it to be open on Apple.
Oh my god, the second film, yeah, probably one of the better sci-fi films of the last decade. I would suggest, but yeah, okay, great choice.
Maybe if I can add a film,
please.
Blade Runner, also the original Blade Runner.
Yes, yes.
Quintessential sci-fi, yeah, amazing.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yep, Alon, same question.
For me, it's keeping it really simple. It's Iron Man. I think Iron Man elevated technology and entrepreneurship to a rock star status, and that's very significant.
Yep, I love it. All right, fantastic choices. Hey, look, a pleasure talking to you both today. Let's finish this off by just giving you both an opportunity to tell people where you like to hang out online. If it's like Twitter, X, shout out your Twitter X profile. Please, also the various websites for the companies that you're here to represent. Tell people where they can go to learn more about staking, the Lido DAO. Yep, SSV Labs. How does it all come together? Let's go with you, Alon, first. Please take it away.
So everyone can contact us at ssv.network, our website. There's a link there for our Discord and Twitter and the rest. Feel free.
Awesome. Izzy?
Yeah. Anybody interested can find more about Lido on www.lido.fi, and especially join our Telegram or Discord group. I hang out there a lot. Or the forums research.lido.fi. I don't go much on Twitter. It's not very good for my health.
Yep. All right. Never a truer word spoken. Hey, thank you so much, gentlemen. All the best, and bye for now.
Thank
Thank
you.
you for
Bye-bye.
having us.
All right, there you go. That was Izzy and Alon here to talk about staking, future of restaking, everything staking, really. Yeah, hey, that was a good one. Thank you so much to Izzy and Alon for coming on the show. Thank you to you for listening here at the end of the show. Please make sure you're subscribed to the show in whatever podcast app you are using. But that is it for today's show. This was the Crypto Conversation for Brave New Coin. Bye for now.